Have you ever found yourself swept up in the whirlwind of your emotions, feeling as though you're tossed around by an uncontrollable storm? Emotions can often feel like a roller coaster, some moments uplifting, others unsettling, leaving you feeling disoriented and off balance. But what if I told you that there's a way to find peace, even amidst that chaos? A way to ground yourself and embrace your emotions without being overwhelmed by them. You are not alone in feeling this way. The ups and downs of life are part of the human experience, and many have walked the path you're on. But there's a way forward, one that is not only liberating, but transformative. The truth is, there is a path to emotional freedom, an ancient path that has been practiced for thousands of years. It is the path of Buddhism, a way of life that teaches us how to master our emotions, to understand ourselves deeply, and to unlock a profound peace that comes from within. Buddhism does not promise a life free from hardship. In fact, it acknowledges the inevitable suffering that comes with existence. But what Buddhism offers is a way to understand and transcend that suffering, to transform the emotional chaos into a source of growth and enlightenment. By following the principles of mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom, you can begin to see your emotions not as enemies to be feared or suppressed, but as signals that can guide you toward greater understanding and inner peace. At the heart of Buddhism lies the teaching of the Four Noble Truths, which form the foundation of this path. The first truth is the acknowledgement that suffering, or dukkha, is an intrinsic part of life. Whether it's emotional pain, physical illness, or the inevitable changes of existence, we all experience suffering. The second truth reveals the cause of suffering: attachment. Our desire for things to be permanent, our attachment to identities, possessions, and even relationships leads to dissatisfaction and pain when those things inevitably change or fade away. But here's where the Buddhist path offers something truly transformative: the third noble truth. This truth teaches that there is a way out of suffering. Through letting go of attachments and shifting our relationship with our emotions, we can find freedom. The fourth noble truth presents the path to liberation, the Noble Eightfold Path, a guide to living mindfully, ethically, and wisely. This path helps us navigate the stormy seas of our emotions with a steady mind and a compassionate heart. Mindfulness is one of the core practices of Buddhism, and it holds the key to understanding and transforming our emotions. Mindfulness invites us to be fully present in each moment, aware of our thoughts, feelings, and physical sensations without judgment. By observing our emotions as they arise, we can learn to respond to them with clarity rather than being swept away by them. This practice cultivates a deep awareness that allows us to recognize when we are caught in negative thought patterns and to choose a more peaceful, balanced response. In addition to mindfulness, compassion is another central teaching in Buddhism that can help us navigate our emotional world. Compassion is the ability to empathize with the suffering of others and ourselves, and it is the antidote to the harshness and judgment that so often accompany negative emotions. By practicing compassion, we learn to treat ourselves with kindness during moments of emotional turmoil, rather than harshly criticizing ourselves or feeling shame. This compassionate attitude helps us release the grip of negative emotions and opens the door to healing. The practice of meditation is also essential in Buddhism. Meditation allows us to deepen our mindfulness, cultivate compassion, and develop insight into the nature of our emotions. Through meditation, we create space between ourselves and our emotions, enabling us to observe them without being overwhelmed by them. We begin to see that emotions are not fixed or permanent. They come and go, like waves on the ocean. With this understanding, we can ride the waves of our emotions without being tossed around by them. In Buddhism, there is a profound understanding of the interconnectedness of all things. Our emotions, like all aspects of life, are not separate from the world around us. They are part of the vast web of existence. When we cultivate awareness of this interconnectedness, we begin to understand that our emotional states are not just personal experiences. They are reflections of the greater human condition. By embracing this truth, We develop greater empathy for others and for ourselves, and we begin to let go of the need for emotional control. Instead, we can find peace in simply being present with what is, accepting ourselves as we are, and accepting the impermanence of life. It is through these practices that we can experience a deep transformation in how we relate to our emotions. What begins as a struggle can become a source of liberation. We learn that emotions are not to be feared or avoided. They are opportunities for growth. In every emotional experience, there is a lesson to be learned, a chance to deepen our understanding of ourselves and the world. And as we continue on this path, we find that emotional freedom is not something that we achieve through force or control, but through acceptance and understanding. This journey is not about escaping the realities of life or denying the emotions that arise within us. It is about learning to live fully with our emotions, to be present with them, and to respond to them in a way that fosters peace, wisdom, and compassion. It is about transforming the emotional roller coaster into a smooth ride, one that flows with grace and understanding. So, if you find yourself caught in the whirlwind of your emotions, know that you are not alone. The teachings of Buddhism offer a path to emotional peace that anyone can follow. It is a path that leads not to the elimination of all emotional turmoil, but to the ability to navigate those storms with mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom. This journey is not just about religion. It is about understanding yourself and the world in a way that brings true freedom and lasting peace. Stay with me on this journey, and let's explore the transformative power of mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom together. This could change everything for you, just as it has for countless others who have walked this path before you. Let us take a moment to reflect on the Buddhist perspective on emotions. In Buddhism, emotions are not viewed as permanent fixtures of our existence. Rather, they are seen as transient, like waves on the ocean, constantly shifting, rising, and falling. This understanding of the impermanence of emotions is central to Buddhist practice. It's a teaching that invites us to recognize that our feelings, no matter how intense they may seem in the moment, are not fixed and unchanging. Just as the weather changes, so too do our emotions. This is a liberating insight. When we look at emotions through the lens of impermanence, we start to see that anger, sadness, anxiety, or even joy, none of these feelings last forever. They arise, they peak, and then they fade away. Imagine for a moment that you are in the middle of a difficult emotion. Maybe you're feeling angry, frustrated, or deeply sad. It's easy to feel overwhelmed, as if these emotions are defining who we are at that very moment. However, in Buddhism, we are encouraged to step back and recognize that these emotions, like all things in life, are fleeting. They will not remain forever. This simple realization can create a profound space for peace and mindfulness in your life. When you begin to understand that your emotions are impermanent, it shifts your relationship with them. Instead of reacting impulsively to the emotions you feel, you can start to observe them. You don't need to suppress them or deny their existence, but rather, you become the observer, standing back from the emotional storm and simply witnessing it. You allow your emotions to come and go, much like the waves crashing against the shore. Instead of being swept away, you learn to surf the waves of your emotions, riding them with mindfulness and awareness. This approach isn't about controlling your emotions or trying to force them away. It's about shifting your perspective. The practice of mindfulness in Buddhism teaches us that the act of observing our emotions without becoming entangled in them is a path to emotional freedom. By cultivating this awareness, we begin to see that we are not our emotions. They do not define us. We are the ones who can choose how to respond to them. Personally, I have found that remembering the impermanence of my emotions has had a transformative effect on how I navigate difficult feelings. In the past, I would have reacted to anger or frustration by lashing out, perhaps saying or doing things I didn't mean. But now, I've learned to pause and breathe. I remind myself that this feeling will not last forever. I don't have to act in the heat of the moment. This simple shift has been a game changer for me. It has allowed me to find a sense of balance, even in the midst of emotional turbulence. When I stopped attaching myself to my emotions as if they were permanent, everything began to change. I no longer viewed anger as a part of my identity, nor did I allow sadness to define me. I learned to let go of the idea that I had to hold on to these feelings and carry them with me indefinitely. Instead, I recognized that emotions are like visitors. They come, they stay for a while, and then they leave. And with this understanding, I found that I could create space in my life for a sense of calm, peace, and clarity. The Buddha's teachings on impermanence also encourage us to reflect on the nature of suffering. Buddhism does not shy away from the reality of suffering. In fact, it recognizes that suffering is an inherent part of life. The First Noble Truth teaches that suffering, or dukkha, is an unavoidable part of existence. But the Second Noble Truth reveals the cause of suffering, attachment. When we become attached to our emotions, whether positive or negative, we begin to suffer. We cling to the idea that our emotions should remain fixed, or that they define us in some way. This attachment creates a sense of frustration and dissatisfaction because, as we know, emotions are in constant flux. The Buddha's insight into this dynamic invites us to break free from attachment. By practicing non-attachment to our emotions, we free ourselves from the cycle of suffering. This doesn't mean we become indifferent or emotionally numb. Rather, it means we learn to experience our emotions fully without the need to hold on to them. We let them rise and fall, just as we allow ourselves to breathe in and out, without controlling or clinging to either breath. The beauty of this practice lies in its simplicity. We don't have to fight against our emotions or try to suppress them. We simply acknowledge them, experience them fully, and then let them go. This practice is a reminder that we are not defined by our emotions. We are the conscious beings who can observe, understand, and choose our responses to them. And through this awareness, we cultivate greater wisdom and peace. In my own journey, embracing the impermanence of my emotions has led to a deeper sense of inner calm. I no longer feel like I'm at the mercy of my emotions, swept away by every surge of anger, fear, or sadness. Instead, I can pause and reflect before responding. I can recognize when I'm caught up in a negative emotional pattern and gently release it. The freedom that comes from this practice is profound. It has given me the space to respond to life with greater clarity, compassion, and balance. This understanding of impermanence is not just a mental exercise. It is something that can be embodied in every aspect of life. When you encounter difficult emotions, remember that they are not permanent. They are part of the ebb and flow of life. By practicing mindfulness, you can cultivate the wisdom to step back and observe them without reacting impulsively. This approach allows you to respond with kindness, compassion, and equanimity, no matter what emotions arise. In the Buddhist tradition, we often hear the phrase, "This too shall pass." It is a reminder that no matter how intense or overwhelming our emotions may be in the moment, they are temporary, they will pass. And in that passing, we have the opportunity to experience greater freedom and peace. With each emotion that arises and fades, we are reminded of the impermanence of all things. And with that reminder comes the opportunity for transformation. In conclusion, the Buddhist approach to emotions is a powerful path to emotional freedom. By recognizing the impermanence of our emotions, we can stop identifying with them and start observing them with mindfulness. We learn to let go of attachment and create space for peace and balance. This practice allows us to respond to life's challenges with greater wisdom and compassion, and to live more fully in the present moment, free from the grip of our ever-changing emotions. So, the next time you find yourself caught in a difficult emotion, take a deep breath and remind yourself, this too shall pass. You have the power to observe it, to experience it, and then to let it go. With this understanding, you can find a deeper sense of peace and emotional freedom, no matter what life throws your way. So how do we actually begin to practice this? How do we navigate the stormy seas of our emotions without being completely overwhelmed by them? The answer lies in mindfulness. In Buddhism, mindfulness, or sati in Pali, is a central practice that serves as the foundation for understanding and transforming our relationship with emotions. But what does mindfulness really mean, and how can we incorporate it into our daily lives? Mindfulness is the practice of staying fully present, of bringing our awareness to the here and now. It's about being fully engaged in the present moment, without distraction and without judgment. In Buddhism, mindfulness is not merely a mental exercise, but a way of living. It is the conscious effort to observe our thoughts, feelings, and bodily sensations with clarity, without becoming entangled in them. Mindfulness allows us to step back and observe our emotional experiences as they arise, without reacting impulsively or being swept away by them. This practice is not reserved for moments of meditation alone. It is meant to be woven into every aspect of our lives. Whether you are walking through a park, eating a meal, or working at your desk, mindfulness invites you to pay attention to the simple act of being. When you engage in a task, rather than letting your mind wander or becoming lost in worries, mindfulness encourages you to focus on the sensations, sounds, and actions involved in the moment. It's about noticing the sights, sounds, and even the subtle movements in your body, as if you were experiencing them for the first time. Let me share with you a personal reflection. When I first encountered the practice of mindfulness, I have to admit, I was a bit skeptical. I thought it sounded a bit overrated, or perhaps a bit too simple to be effective. It was hard to imagine how something as basic as focusing on the present moment could have a profound impact. But when I took the time to give it a real try, I realized just how transformative mindfulness truly is. The first time I practiced mindfulness intentionally, it wasn't during a formal meditation session. I was simply taking a walk through a quiet neighborhood, and I decided to focus on my breathing and the sounds around me. I consciously tried to be aware of each step I took and how my body felt as I walked. Instead of letting my mind race ahead with worries, thoughts, and distractions, I allowed myself to be fully present with the act of walking. It was in that moment that I truly understood the power of mindfulness. I felt a sense of groundedness that I had never experienced before. The simple act of pausing to breathe deeply and to tune into my surroundings brought a sense of calm that had been missing from my life. My mind, which had often been racing in different directions, quieted. I was no longer just going through the motions of walking. I was aware of each step, each breath, each moment. It was as though the world slowed down, and I was able to meet it with a clearer mind and a more centered heart. This was my first taste of the true power of mindfulness. It's such a simple tool, but its effects are profound. In Buddhism, mindfulness is taught as a way to cultivate insight into the nature of our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. By practicing mindfulness, we learn to see the impermanence of all things, including our emotions. Rather than getting caught in the whirlwind of anger, sadness, or fear, mindfulness allows us to observe these emotions with equanimity, understanding that they, too, are transient. Like the waves on the ocean, our emotions rise, peak, and eventually subside. One of the core teachings of Buddhism is that suffering arises from our attachments. We suffer when we cling to things, whether it's our desires, possessions, or even our emotions. Mindfulness helps us to release this attachment. By paying attention to our feelings as they arise, we begin to realize that emotions do not define us. They come and go, and they do not need to control our actions or our peace of mind. In the same way, when we practice mindfulness, we also cultivate compassion and awareness toward others. By being present in each moment, we are more attuned to the needs of those around us. Instead of being distracted or preoccupied with our own thoughts and emotions, we become more open to others. We listen with full attention, respond with care, and offer support in a way that is rooted in a mindful awareness of the present moment. In the Buddhist tradition, mindfulness is often paired with other practices, such as loving kindness, metta, and meditation. But even in our everyday activities, mindfulness can be a form of meditation. When we engage fully with whatever we are doing, we create space for our minds to settle, for our emotions to calm, and for a deeper connection to the present moment to unfold. By bringing mindfulness into all aspects of our life, we begin to cultivate a more balanced, peaceful, and compassionate way of being. Mindfulness also plays a key role in helping us break free from the cycle of reactivity. Our natural tendency, when faced with difficult emotions or challenging situations, is to react impulsively. We might lash out in anger, withdraw in sadness, or become overwhelmed with anxiety. But mindfulness teaches us to pause before reacting. It gives us the space to respond thoughtfully, rather than simply reacting out of habit or impulse. This pause, this moment of awareness, is incredibly powerful. It allows us to check in with ourselves and ask, what is really happening here? What is the source of this emotion, and how do I want to respond? When we take the time to respond mindfully, we break free from the cycle of emotional reactivity. Instead of being a slave to our emotions, we begin to live with greater freedom and clarity. I can say, from personal experience, that mindfulness has truly changed the way I navigate my emotions and interactions with the world. When I first started practicing it, I didn't expect the profound shift that occurred in my life. The more I practiced, the more I began to notice how much calmer and more grounded I felt, even in the midst of stressful situations. Mindfulness gave me the ability to create space between my emotions and my reactions, allowing me to make more conscious choices about how I respond. It's a practice that takes time, and there are days when I find it challenging to stay present. But the key is in the consistency of practice. With each moment of mindfulness, we train our minds to return to the present, to embrace the impermanence of our emotions, and to cultivate peace in the face of life's challenges. So, how do we practice mindfulness? It begins with the simple act of paying attention, being fully present with whatever we are doing, whether it's washing dishes, walking, or simply sitting in silence. Start by noticing your breath, feeling the sensations in your body, and observing the flow of thoughts and emotions without judgment. With each moment of mindfulness, you are training yourself to live with greater awareness, compassion, and freedom. In Buddhism, mindfulness is a tool for liberation. It allows us to see the world clearly, without the distortions created by our thoughts, fears, and attachments. Through mindfulness, we come to understand the nature of our minds, our emotions, and the impermanence of all things. And with that understanding comes a deep sense of peace, a peace that is not dependent on external circumstances, but arises from within. In conclusion, mindfulness is a simple yet profound practice that can radically transform our relationship with emotions. It's about being present, being aware, and allowing our emotions to rise and fall without clinging to them. It's a practice that brings clarity, balance, and peace into our lives. And when practiced consistently, mindfulness can become a powerful tool for emotional freedom and spiritual growth. So, I invite you to try it for yourself, to begin bringing mindfulness into your daily life, and to see the transformative power it holds. It's a journey worth taking, and it begins with just one mindful breath. In our journey through life, we all encounter challenging emotions: anger, fear, anxiety, sadness. These feelings can arise at any time, and they often feel overwhelming, pulling us into a whirlwind of distress. Many of us struggle to navigate these emotions, perhaps even pushing them away or trying to avoid them. However, the teachings of Buddhism offer us a transformative perspective on how we can deal with these emotions in a more mindful and compassionate way. Buddhism teaches us that these emotions, though often difficult to experience, are not inherently bad or wrong. They are simply part of the human experience. In fact, they are natural responses to the events we encounter in our lives. What matters most, however, is how we respond to them. In the Buddhist tradition, there is an emphasis on acknowledging the full spectrum of human emotions, including the uncomfortable ones. Rather than suppressing, avoiding, or denying these emotions, Buddhism encourages us to face them with curiosity and compassion. The practice of mindfulness teaches us to be fully present with whatever emotions arise, without judgment or resistance. Instead of labeling our emotions as good or bad, we learn to approach them with openness, accepting them as they are. By recognizing that these emotions are part of the flow of life, we begin to free ourselves from the grip they often have over us. The Buddha's teachings about the nature of suffering, dukkha, remind us that emotional pain is an inevitable part of life. Suffering arises because we become attached to our desires, expectations, and the transient nature of life. When we face challenging emotions, we often react from a place of attachment, trying to push them away or hold onto them in fear. However, through mindfulness and self-awareness, we can recognize these emotional responses without becoming consumed by them. Buddhism teaches that the root cause of emotional suffering is not the emotions themselves, but rather our attachment to them and our desire to either avoid or control them. In this sense, the practice is not about eliminating or repressing our emotions, but about understanding their impermanent nature and letting them pass through us without clinging to them. This approach to emotional regulation is deeply rooted in the Buddhist practice of vipassana, or insight meditation. In vipassana, practitioners observe their thoughts and feelings without attachment, understanding that they are temporary phenomena. By watching our emotions with mindfulness, we can begin to recognize patterns in how they arise, change, and dissolve. We learn that emotions, no matter how intense or overwhelming, are not permanent. They are like clouds passing through the sky, momentary and ever-changing. This insight helps us break free from the reactive cycle that keeps us trapped in negative emotional states. One of the most powerful insights that Buddhism offers is that by facing our emotions with awareness and compassion, we can transform them. It may sound counterintuitive, but Buddhism teaches us that running away from uncomfortable feelings only perpetuates the cycle of suffering. By avoiding anger, fear, or anxiety, we give these emotions more power over us. The key is not to deny them, but to confront them directly, with a sense of curiosity and understanding. When we face our emotions head-on, we stop feeding into the stories and judgments we attach to them. Instead of identifying with the anger or anxiety, we begin to see them as passing experiences, temporary and fleeting, just like any other thought or sensation. The practice of metta, loving-kindness meditation, is a way of cultivating compassion, not only for others, but also for ourselves in moments of emotional distress. Through metta, we learn to offer ourselves the same kindness and care that we would give to a friend in need. This includes being compassionate with ourselves when we experience negative emotions. In moments of anger or fear, instead of berating ourselves for feeling this way, we can respond with kindness and understanding, saying to ourselves, "It's okay to feel this way. These feelings are part of being human, and they will pass." By giving ourselves this compassion, we create the space for transformation, allowing the emotions to release naturally, rather than holding onto them out of fear or resistance. Through my own experience, I've come to realize how liberating it can be to stop running from negative emotions. For a long time, I believed that in order to be at peace, I had to get rid of all the bad emotions. I thought that in order to be a good person or a peaceful person, I had to avoid anger, anxiety, and fear. But the more I practiced mindfulness and metta, the more I discovered that it's not about eliminating these emotions, but about transforming the way I relate to them. Rather than seeing them as threats, I began to approach them as opportunities for growth and understanding. One of the most profound shifts I've experienced through Buddhist practice is that when I simply sit with my difficult emotions, without judgment or resistance, something remarkable happens. I start to understand the root cause of these emotions, the underlying fears or unmet needs that often fuel them. Anger, for instance, may arise when we feel wronged or disrespected. Anxiety may arise from the fear of the unknown or the desire for control. When we sit with these emotions and investigate them with mindfulness, we can begin to uncover the deeper layers beneath the surface, the beliefs and patterns that influence how we react to the world. This practice of emotional inquiry allows us to respond to our emotions with greater clarity and less reactivity. Instead of being swept away by the storm of anger or anxiety, we can watch it from a place of equanimity, observing it without getting entangled in it. The key is to acknowledge the emotion fully, without pushing it away or acting on it impulsively, and then allow it to release naturally. This process is deeply healing. By sitting with our emotions, we break the cycle of avoidance and resistance that often keeps us trapped in negative states. In Buddhist philosophy, there is also the understanding that all phenomena are impermanent. This includes our emotions. Just as our thoughts and experiences are transient, so too are our feelings. The more we can accept this impermanence, the less power our emotions will have over us. Instead of fearing our anger or anxiety, we begin to recognize that they are simply part of the ever-changing flow of life. By accepting this, we can begin to let go of the grip these emotions have on us. They no longer define us, and we no longer need to be controlled by them. Through this understanding, we also begin to develop a greater sense of compassion for others who are experiencing difficult emotions. We start to recognize that just as we struggle with anger, fear, or sadness, so too do others. This understanding creates a deeper sense of connection and empathy, allowing us to offer compassion not only to ourselves, but also to those around us. The more we practice self-compassion in the face of our emotions, the more we can extend that same compassion to others who are suffering. In conclusion, Buddhism teaches us that emotions, even the difficult ones, are not to be feared or avoided, but to be understood and embraced. By facing our anger, fear, or anxiety with curiosity and compassion, we can begin to transform these emotions rather than being controlled by them. The key is mindfulness, the practice of being fully present with our emotions, without judgment or resistance. Through this practice, we create the space for emotional growth and healing, ultimately finding freedom from the grip of negative emotions. By sitting with our feelings, we allow them to arise and pass naturally, transforming them into opportunities for insight, wisdom, and compassion. In this way, we move closer to the Buddhist ideal of living with a peaceful mind and an open heart. Compassion is a core teaching in Buddhism, not just for others, but also for ourselves. It's easy to forget this when life gets difficult, especially in moments of personal failure or hardship. However, the Buddhist path emphasizes that true compassion begins with a deep, understanding love for ourselves. Often, we are quick to judge ourselves harshly, caught in a cycle of self-criticism when things don't go as planned. But Buddhism teaches us that it's not through self-judgment that we find peace or growth, but through self-compassion. Self-compassion in Buddhism isn't about letting ourselves off the hook or avoiding responsibility. Rather, it is about recognizing our shared humanity and our imperfections with kindness and understanding. The Buddha's teachings remind us that suffering is an inherent part of life, and we should not add to that suffering by condemning ourselves for the things we cannot control. When we extend compassion to ourselves, we are embracing our imperfections as part of the human experience. By doing so, we begin to heal. In Buddhist teachings, the concept of compassion is often associated with karuna, the quality of wanting to alleviate the suffering of others. But before we can offer compassion to others, we must first cultivate it within ourselves. This practice starts with mindfulness, being present with our emotions without judgment, acknowledging the feelings that arise, and responding with kindness instead of criticism. Self-compassion, in this sense, is not an indulgence, but a necessary step towards emotional and spiritual growth. Life is full of challenges, and Buddhism doesn't suggest that we should escape from suffering, but rather transform the way we respond to it. We are all subject to life's storms, whether they be moments of failure, loss, or disappointment. The practice of self-compassion allows us to navigate these storms with a sense of equanimity. Instead of succumbing to despair, we can meet each difficulty with the strength that comes from loving acceptance. This is the transformative power of compassion. It allows us to endure hardship without being crushed by it, to face adversity with a resilient heart. Imagine, for a moment, how different life could be if we approached our struggles with kindness instead of criticism. In Buddhism, this is often referred to as right effort, or making the effort to transform negative emotions into positive ones. Self-compassion is not about ignoring our flaws, but rather acknowledging them with love and understanding. When we treat ourselves with this kind of care, we open the door to healing and growth. Our mistakes become opportunities for learning, and we are no longer chained by shame or regret. One of the turning points in my own life was when I began to practice self-compassion. I used to be my harshest critic, holding myself to an impossible standard and feeling like a failure every time I made a mistake. But Buddhism teaches us that mistakes are not a reflection of our worth, but an essential part of the learning process. Instead of beating myself up, I started treating myself with the same kindness and understanding that I would offer to a friend who was struggling. I began to recognize that I, too, deserved compassion, even when I felt that I had fallen short. This shift in mindset was not instantaneous, but it was deeply transformative. By embracing self-compassion, I began to release the weight of guilt and self-judgment that had held me back for so long. I allowed myself to be imperfect and learned to forgive myself. This inner shift created space for healing. Instead of focusing on what I had done wrong, I focused on how I could learn and grow. Self-compassion gave me the strength to face challenges with a sense of hope rather than defeat. The Buddha's teachings on compassion are not just about feeling good in the moment. They are about fostering lasting transformation. Compassion, both for ourselves and others, is a foundation of emotional strength. When we cultivate self-compassion, we open ourselves to the possibility of change. We learn that no matter how difficult life may be, we have the internal resources to cope and grow. Compassion helps us to rebuild and renew, not just as a response to pain, but as a proactive force for peace and joy in our lives. In Buddhism, we are encouraged to reflect on the Four Noble Truths, which speak to the nature of suffering and the path to its cessation. The first truth is that suffering is an inherent part of life. The second is that suffering arises from attachment, craving, and ignorance. The third truth tells us that there is an end to suffering, and the fourth offers the path to that end, the Eightfold Path. This path is not just about external behavior, but also about cultivating the right inner attitude, which includes the practice of compassion. Self-compassion is an essential component of this path. It is through self-compassion that we can begin to let go of attachment to our ego, our need for perfection, and our judgment of ourselves. The practice of loving-kindness meditation, or metta, is a tool that Buddhists use to cultivate compassion, first towards themselves and then towards others. In this practice, we silently repeat phrases such as, "May I be happy," "May I be free from suffering," and "May I live with ease." These phrases help us to open our hearts to ourselves and to others. By practicing metta towards ourselves, we begin to shift the way we view our own struggles. Instead of seeing them as failures, we can see them as opportunities for growth, each one an invitation to practice kindness and understanding. In Buddhist philosophy, suffering is not something to avoid or fear, but an opportunity to cultivate wisdom and compassion. The more we practice compassion towards ourselves, the more we develop the emotional resilience needed to handle life's inevitable challenges. When we stop being so hard on ourselves, we allow ourselves to heal. Self-compassion becomes the foundation from which we can extend compassion to others. When we learn to be gentle with ourselves, we begin to see others through the same compassionate lens. True strength in Buddhism comes from being able to face ourselves with honesty and love, acknowledging our flaws and mistakes without judgment. It is in this space of acceptance that we find the possibility for change and transformation. Compassion is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of strength, a power that comes from deep within. By embracing self-compassion, we are embracing the very essence of Buddhism: understanding, patience, and love for ourselves and all beings. Life, in its essence, is chaotic. It is filled with moments of unpredictability, noise, and uncertainty. At times, it feels like we are constantly swept along by external forces, trying to keep up with the rapid pace and the endless stream of demands. In this whirlwind, it is easy to become overwhelmed, lost, or consumed by the challenges that life presents. However, the teachings of Buddhism offer us a different way to approach this complexity. Instead of trying to escape the chaos of life, Buddhism teaches us how to find peace within it. It's not about running away from the world or disconnecting from it. Rather, it's about cultivating the ability to be fully present in the world while maintaining a calm and open heart. Buddhism shows us that peace doesn't arise from controlling every circumstance or arranging life in a way that aligns with our desires. Instead, true peace is cultivated from within. It comes from learning to let go of attachment to outcomes, expectations, and the constant desire for things to be different than they are. When we attach ourselves too strongly to the outcomes we desire, we inevitably set ourselves up for frustration, disappointment, and suffering. Buddhism teaches us that suffering arises from our clinging to things that are impermanent. Everything, whether it is a relationship, a job, or even our own emotions, is transient. The more tightly we hold on, the more we increase our suffering. One of the fundamental teachings in Buddhism is the concept of impermanence, known as anicca. Everything in life is constantly changing. Nothing stays the same. Our emotions, situations, relationships, and even our thoughts are all in a constant state of flux. By acknowledging the impermanent nature of all things, we learn to loosen our grip on them and to embrace the ebb and flow of life with greater ease. The acceptance of impermanence doesn't mean we become indifferent or detached from life. Rather, it means we approach life with an open heart, ready to experience whatever comes our way without fear or resistance. In a world that often encourages us to control everything and chase after perfection, Buddhism offers a radically different approach. Instead of striving to manage every aspect of life, we are encouraged to embrace the present moment and flow with it. This doesn't mean giving up on our goals or responsibilities, but it does mean approaching life with an attitude of acceptance and openness. Rather than resisting what is happening right now, we are taught to acknowledge it and work with it in a way that promotes peace. This practice is called mindfulness, or sati, and it is one of the central pillars of Buddhist practice.